Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, and joining us today is Laura Carney. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, guys.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I am excited to have you here today. So let me tell you a little bit about her. So Laura Carney is a magazine copy editor, writer, and illustrator who lives in New Jersey. She's a copy editor for Good Housekeeping, and she proofreads for St. Martin's Press. She has also written for The Washington Post, The Hill, Good Housekeeping, Runner's World, and many other. There's a long list of publications that she has written for. She's currently writing a memoir about her father, who was killed by a distracted driver, and she has worked to raise awareness as an advocate to end distracted driving, and she has a few different organizations that she works with. And today would have been her dad's birthday. How old would he have been today?
Today, he would have been 68.
68 years old. Well, tell us a little bit about your dad and how he lost his life to distracted driving.
Sure. It's just such weird timing that we would be doing this today. I was thinking a little bit about the last photograph I ever took with my dad was actually on his birthday. It was on his 54th birthday. And I was... I was about to move away. I had just finished college, and I moved to New York. And he was just so excited about my doing that because I wanted to pursue journalism. And I was a little bit afraid of it, but he just really encouraged me to be brave about it. And it was pretty much the best summer of my life. Like, I met the man who's now my husband. Just as you can imagine when you're 25 in New York, how romantic that is, even though usually you're totally broke and but
good times.
Can't really do anything.
Yes, young and poor, wonderful.
Yes, exactly. So it's kind of the last thing you expect that, so essentially 3 months after I moved to New York, a teenager on her phone ran a red light and T-boned his car, and he just died instantly.
Oh, that is terrible.
There's always the thoughts that you'd have of, oh, should I not have left? Because this terrible thing happened, and maybe if I'd stayed home. But that's a common feeling people have when someone dies. Like, what could I have done differently? And at the time, people didn't really talk about distracted driving. It wasn't like a hot button issue. Everybody used their phones. It wasn't something, anybody. I mean, the weird thing is one of the news articles about the incident did say teen cited for talking on cell phone. But it wasn't something anyone really paid close attention to because it was just, we didn't really know the dangers of it yet. So, I went about a decade not even thinking about that. And I kind of stuck to my guns. I stuck with pursuing journalism. I finally got a job at Good Housekeeping. I guess I want to say about 8 years into my career, which to me was just like a dream come true because I'd always wanted to work for a women's magazine. And I mean, now I really feel like that was fated. It was almost meant to happen that I would get that job because one day at my desk, a story came across that was about distracted driving. And it was about a man who'd lost his daughter because I believe the guy was reaching for his cell phone and an iced tea at the same time. Mm-hmm. And he ran a stop sign. And I just, the way I always describe it is alarms went off in my head when I read that story because I just thought, oh, it was the phone. It was the teenager's phone.
Right.
And I knew I had to call him. Like, I knew I had to find some way to help because I had experience with this. And it really just started from there. And when my father passed away, one of the ways I coped with it was by writing about him. And it wasn't like, the normal kind of writing I would do. It was almost like compulsive. Like I think what typically would happen would be I would be going through a life experience that I would have needed his advice with, and he wasn't there. So my brain sort of did this thing to compensate for it. And I would find myself writing these stories about lessons he taught me when I was a child. But I never did anything with them. Like, I always sort of told myself, oh, someday this will be a memoir and maybe it will make a difference. Not even just with distracted driving because I didn't know about that yet, but just with how people process grief and how people talk about grief. Because when I was 25, there weren't a lot of people my age who I could discuss it with.
Yeah.
So that was my goal originally, but I couldn't quite figure out how am I going to make that writing get published and still be taken seriously as a journalist and, still do the other kinds of writing I want to do. But when I joined this cause, it was sort of like the writing I had already done was something that could help it tremendously. Because it was, so far anyway, because it put a real personal face on what happens to people when they're lost this way.
Exactly. I love how hearing that story because it's so cool to see how all the pieces just fit together. Sometimes a direction you're supposed to go, like, okay, well, I know I need to write this down. And that was part of,
Right.
The healing process for you, but you didn't know where it was going to go until a long time after. And so now here you are several years later and it's all falling into place. So that's neat how it kind of just, you can't see starting out how things are going to come out, but it all works out in the end for, to be able to help other people. And so that is a really cool thing, how this is coming together for you. So this memoir about your father that you've been writing, it focuses on his life. And is it also going to be a lot about distracted driving, or are those two separate as far as your book?
Well, so I don't, I'm still working on the book deal aspect of it, but I have a blog for the time being where everyone, anyone who wants to read it can come and check out the journey I'm on with it. And also I want to backtrack just a minute because when I said, it's helping it tremendously, because I don't know that for sure yet, because unfortunately I started becoming active at a time when the problem's actually getting worse. The numbers of fatalities from car crashes the past 2 years went up 14%. And that's like the biggest increase we've seen in 50 years.
Wow.
So, my hope is that the more people read about this, the more they can put a personal face to it. But one issue I really had with some of my essays over the years and trying to figure out how am I going to put all of this together into a cohesive structure was I found myself writing the same story over and over again in some way or another, because it's always like, there's that sad, tragic story when it happened, how it happened, who it was, and then, there's a couple adjectives about the person. And I feel like when that happens enough times, especially the past 2 years, as this problem keeps getting worse, people become desensitized to it. Almost like when you hear about school shootings. It's like, oh, there it is again, another one. And, I remember Obama gave a speech a couple years ago about this shouldn't be the new normal, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I had kind of a serendipitous thing happen back in November. My brother had just bought a house, and I went to visit him with my husband. And as he was unpacking for the move, he found this little bag that had belonged to my dad that I guess, someone had given to him when he passed away about 13 years ago. So he opens it and he's like, do you know about this? And it turned out my dad had written a bucket list when he was 29. And, I kind of knew he liked to write lists of, goals and dreams because my mom had talked about it, but I'd never actually seen it. And as we're reading through this list, my husband said to me, no, this is your book. This is what you need to be writing about, is this list. You need to finish it. Because the sad thing about the list was it was 60 different things and he'd only checked off 5 of them by the time he died.
Tell us a little bit more. So I know you've been blogging about that, and tell us more about what you've been doing on your father's list.
Sure. Well, and then the next step of it after I started the blog was I had already had a distracted driving article in the works at Good Housekeeping. And, I'd submitted a few essays for it. And essentially my editor saw the blog and said, no, this is it. So now, it's in Good Housekeeping, which has been just amazing. And each step of the way that I've been doing is, the first thing I decided to do was run 10 miles straight. And the reason I decided to do that was because I've already been a runner, an activist runner. The first major run I did was the New York Marathon a year ago. And once I realized that people run for charity, I decided to raise money for End Distracted Driving. So I raised nearly $2,000 doing that. And I thought, okay, well, this is kind of a natural extension of that. And this time I ran for Girls on the Run. which is an organization that just, encourages self-esteem and empowerment and confidence in young girls. And, that's something my dad really taught me. And I've come to realize that not every woman had that experience or like that close of a relationship with their father. My dad used to always joke he was a feminist. So, I thought that seemed like a natural first thing to do. And also, even though I'd run a marathon, I'm kind of a run walker. Like I'll do it in intervals.
Right.
I'd never actually just straight run anything. Like I could probably do a mile at most straight running. So this whole goal of running 10 miles straight was like, it seemed almost impossible to me.
Yeah.
And also it's like my dad didn't do it for a reason. So I just thought, okay, that has to be it. That's the first thing I'm going to do. And I have to say, it's been really amazing, some of the results I've seen working on this, because when I told my best friend about it, she's like, you're not going to run the whole LA marathon and then do 10 miles straight running and finish the remaining 16. Like that's just too difficult. Like, what are you doing? And we found out you could run it as a team, as relay partners. And she wasn't even a runner. Like she had just even started walking long distances and hiking in the past year. And so she decided to run half of it with me.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it was almost like, the self-actualizing I'm experiencing from doing these things on the list is affecting the other people who choose to help with it. And I have to wonder, if my dad had ever shared this list with anyone, would he have had the same result?
Oh, that is a cool thought. That's a cool lesson, to be a cool takeaway there, that, in doing that, it can help other people's lives. I like that. So tell us some of the harder things on the list, the things that maybe, your dad was looking forward to, but that are going to be more of a challenge for you. Well,
so I haven't announced this yet, but I'm going to write about it probably in the next week. The next thing I'm going to do is swim the width of a river. Okay. I have no idea why he wanted to do that. Maybe he thought, okay, this sounds good. So I'm going to do that down in Asheville, North Carolina.
And what is the width of a river?
That's up to interpretation.
Okay.
So like many things on the list. So I think I'm just going to go practice the local Y. And, I think this particular river is about 400 feet, which isn't, that's not undoable. I can do that. Okay. But I think just the idea of swimming in a river in general, as far as like, is there going to be a current? Like, how do you go about doing that? So I'm excited about that one. And then I'm going back so we got married in New Mexico last year, and I'm going back there in June. So for that particular trip, I'm going to try to ride a horse fast.
Okay.
That's another one that he had.
I love it. Oh, that's such a cute glimpse into your dad, to hear the way he wrote these. Swim the width of a river, ride a horse fast. Those are cute. I love it. That's really sweet.
Yep. Yeah, but a lot of the list is places that he wanted to travel to.
Okay.
So one of the strategies I'm working with right now is perhaps I could kind of combine an activity with a place that I'm going to visit. And then if I train for it before I go to the place, and maybe have someone who has some knowledge about the activity help me with it, kind of like my friend did, that might be very interesting as well. And, maybe it would be the same effect. They also would have kind of a confidence boosting, self-actualizing experience. And even the whole idea of doing that is so inspiring to me, because I think honestly, and I know a lot of people now who've experienced what I've experienced with losing a loved one this way. And one of the hardest parts of it is it makes the person feel disposable. Mm. It makes it feel like, okay, well, this terrible thing happened. It was a fluke thing. Can't do anything about it. That's just the way it goes. And then a lot of people find it very uncomfortable to talk about it. So it's like you don't get to hear about the person again. And one of the issues I always had growing up, since, I'm a product of a divorce, and my father was sort of a single dad. My experience with him was sort of separate from my mom's part of the family. So, he was like a Wednesday and Sunday dad. So that was something I already was going through anyway, was nobody really knows my dad. Nobody knows how awesome he is. So when he died, it just really exacerbated it. So for me to see, the lessons he taught me, that I'm able to share that with the world, and also have people who are close to me benefit from it, who didn't even know him. Like, that is like super impactful to me. I mean, like, for example, when I did the run 10 miles straight, my 9-year-old niece decided to join Girls on the Run.
Awesome.
Which might not have happened
Yeah.
if I didn't do that.
Yeah, so it's really in doing these things on his list, you're really carrying on his legacy. So that's a really awesome tribute to your dad. I mean, it's cool for you, but like you said, it's cool for everyone around you too. And I'm so glad you're doing it publicly so other people can learn from it. Now let's talk a little bit about your work with ending distracted driving. So what do you think, you mentioned that, it's gone up, that accidents and incidents because of distracted driving have gone up when it should be the other way around. You also had let me know I'm terrible about watching the news, so I had to look it up, but you had mentioned that there was a recent crash in Texas that killed 13 people. And that was a terrible tragedy. A kid I guess he was 25, and he was texting and ran into a group of people, and 13 people were killed. And we hear, like you said, we're kind of desensitized to it in some ways because we hear about it so often. But unlike school shootings that you also mentioned, the great thing about distracted driving is we can do something about it. And I shouldn't say we can't do anything about school shootings. I had Alyssa Parker on the show, and she had talked about her work of what we can do to make schools safer. But we're not powerless to affect our own driving. And so tell us a little bit about what drivers need to know. What can we do better?
Sure. First off, I just want to clarify with as far as the car crashes, the fatalities going up the last couple of years. We don't know for certain that it's all distracted driving. There are a couple of different causes. Some of it is because employment went up. Some of it is because of gas prices going lower. But basically every single major national agency that I know of is saying that they believe it's from distracted driving. And the reason we can't pinpoint it yet is because it's very underreported. It's very difficult sometimes for cops to say, okay, this person was definitely doing this. But there are actually different state numbers coming out that have revealed that in that particular state, distracted driving was a big part of it. And I know in New Jersey, that was a big part of it the last couple of years.
And I think just looking around, when I'm driving down the freeway, I see so many people on their cell phones. In fact, the other day I saw a guy, I don't even know how he did it. It's like he had Velcroed his phone to his steering wheel so he could text while he was driving. And I just thought, what are you doing? What are you doing? So yeah, we see it all the time. And so I think even if the statistics can't quite prove it yet, we kind of know what's going on.
Well, and I mean, what we do know is that it is a leading cause of death in teens, and it rivals drunk driving. I mean, that information has been gathered, so that's very frightening. AAA, they did a survey about a few months ago, where they found that people in their 20s were most likely to admit to these behaviors, even though, it is across the board. But they were the ones most likely, so now, of course, they're saying, oh, millennials do this. But, I mean, the truth is that everybody's doing it. And I heard from AAA last month, people over the age of 65, while they may do it less frequently, they are more likely to die from it.
That makes sense.
When it actually happens.
Yeah.
I think also what they've found, the National Safety Council and AAA and some of these other places I work with, what they've mostly found when they do these surveys is that people hate it. They hate when they see people using their phones and driving. And I don't mean just texting. I mean, every part of it has actually been proven to be very dangerous. And, one thing a lot of people don't know is that hands-free causes all kinds of car crashes because the problem isn't in your hands, it's in your brain. It's your cognition. So it's like we're kind of gradually learning as a society, okay, this is a dangerous thing, but it's like we blame other people for doing it and we can't recognize our own behavior. And part of that is there's this addictive component of using technology, because, I mean, in general, tech makes our lives better. There are so many conveniences that it applies. For me, what I like to think about it is my phone is a tool, and do I want the tool to rule me, or do I want to rule the tool? Like, do I want to use it for whatever I need, but not be so dependent on it that, like, for example, I have almost no notifications on my phone. I use notifications for missed calls, for texts, but that's it. And anytime I add an app and it's like, do you want any notifications? I'm like, no, I don't want any. Because if I'm driving, I don't want that popping up. I mean, that's something that we can do. There's apps like, I think one's called Cell Control. There's one, there's a new technology coming out from a company called Katasi called Groove, where you kind of like plug this little thing under your steering wheel, and it will block all calls and texts from coming in. And it gives a little message to whoever's calling you or texting you saying, Laura will call you when she reaches her destination. She's driving right now, something like that. That hasn't actually been carried by a phone carrier yet, and some of that is, they're a little nervous to be the first one to do it. But I mean, these technologies are being developed that can stop it. So I think that's a big component of what might make things better. A lot of people talk about autonomous cars in the future, and I hate it when people talk about it like, oh, well, we're headed towards all technology ruling everything anyway. So, like, what's a few deaths in the meantime?
Yeah, so why worry about that now?
But I mean, that could be 20 years down the road. So sometimes I almost feel like the cars have applied these new technologies. Like, it's almost like you have an iPad in your dashboard, getting ready for autonomous vehicles.
True.
But we're not there yet. So it's like, why is it there? Like, why? Like, you don't ever see anyone on a commercial for a car actively using this voice to text or whatever it is while they're driving. You always see them pulled over to the side of the road.
Yeah.
So if that's how they're depicting it in the car commercials, why can't we also do that in our regular everyday lives? Because we're addicted to this technology, because we get bored if we're stuck in traffic. I feel like there's just this constant need for connection that we've sort of been conditioned to believe this is what everybody's doing, so I also have to be doing this or I'm missing out. And one of my major goals with my father's list is, I'm living my life a little bit differently right now because I'm doing this list, which means I have this project, I have this thing I'm doing where I have to live very intentionally. And oftentimes, if you're following a passion or a project and you're living intentionally, you're not as prone to just be kind of, just wandering through life, just picking up and reacting to whatever happens to you, because you've become this very proactive person as opposed to a reactive one. And my hope is that by sharing this story of intentional living, people might start living a little bit more intentionally on their own. And I think if your own life becomes more valuable, then you'll see the lives of people around you as more valuable as well.
Oh, I love that. I think that's so good. Just for all of us, that's really what it's about. If we're proactive with our cell phones and not reactive, then we don't need those notifications all the time. We don't need to be reacting because so-and-so liked something of ours on Facebook while we're driving. It's okay to put it away. It's hard. Like you said, I mean, it's an addictive thing that has become so prevalent in our society to just be constantly on our phones. I'd like to dive a little bit deeper. You had mentioned that it has to do with the way our brains work. So it's not a matter of hands-free. It's a matter of where our attention is. So talk a little bit more about what happens in the brain. And I know there was a really interesting statistic in the sidebar of your article on Good Housekeeping that talked about, you'll have to correct me, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, something when we text at a stoplight and then we start to drive, it takes us, was it 20 seconds before our brains?
27.
27 seconds before our brains are fully aware of the road again. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a scary number. I think part of the addiction, or just the habit of having your phone is whenever there's a free moment, it's like, okay, now I can check it. And I think people apply that to when they're in their cars, because a stoplight, okay, free moment, I can check it. And the truth is, if you do that, yeah, your brain cannot refocus on where you are and what you're doing for another 27 seconds. And I mean, stoplights, I believe, are a little bit shorter than that.
I don't know.
I'm fairly sure. I have to double check my numbers, but the numbers they're comparable. So you could be texting that whole time you're at that red light, and then once it turns green, that's when you finally look up. But guess what? You still have 27 more seconds before you're actually fully there. And as far as how the cognitive stuff works with the brain, I mean, this was really startling for me because even when I started becoming an activist with this, my husband, who's usually the driver, I mean, he still was doing hands-free calls, and we thought, oh no, this is safe, it's okay. And I went to a National Safety Council conference, and they have someone there who's just an expert on all of this research. I mean, it's just stuff from colleges all over the country. University of Utah is one of them. And they had all these studies that revealed, when you're actually engaged in a phone call, whether it's hands-free or handheld, what you actually see through the windshield shrinks by about 3 times.
Wow. That's
right.
Scary.
I mean,
okay.
They had pictures of this, and because they had done studies on drivers and how this works with probably some kind of electrode on their brain or something, and what they found is that it's called inattention blindness. So they're missing billboards, they're missing stop signs, they're missing streetlights without even realizing that they are. So you could get to your destination and you could think, oh, that was fine. I mean, not that you'd even consciously think about it, but if you did, you think, oh, I can multitask. I can use the phone. There's no problem. Nothing happened. Well, things did happen, but you just didn't know because there's a blackout effect. Kind of like, if you get drunk or something, you black out and you don't know what you did the next day. Yeah. So it's like our brains sort of cover it up. It's just what it does naturally. So we don't really know that that's what happened. And the other part that I found really interesting is, how when you're watching a movie and then, I mean, my husband, I drive him crazy with this. I ask him a ton of questions about what's happening in the movie. and
it's too. Wait, fill me in. We were watching this together, but what happened? I didn't get that.
Right, and I always bring that up when people tell me that women are better multitaskers than men. But anyway, so then you're asking all these questions, and then you miss even more of the movie.
Yes.
So it's just this never-ending thing. But the reason that happens if you start a conversation while you're watching a movie is that the part of your brain that processes conversations is the same part that processes moving images.
Oh.
So when you apply that to what it's like when you're driving a car, think about what you're missing with the moving images when you're having this phone conversation.
Wow.
That's actually the same part of your brain. So that's the cognitive element. But I think it's just very difficult for people to remember that because they're looking at the results and they're thinking, oh, multitasking is a skill. I'm really good at doing it. The society wants me to do it. When the truth is, your brain's basically lying to you.
Yeah. And people are just looking at, okay, well, I got there safe. It's fine. I'm good at this, like you said, instead of really thinking about all those little nuances and all the things that they missed.
Yeah, nobody's good at it.
Yeah. So tell us then, we are almost out of time, but I really want you to talk about some tips for what we can do. So I liked the practical one of turning off notifications on your phone. I like that app that you mentioned that you can let people know if they're trying to get a hold of you. I'm driving and I'm not going to answer right now. What are some other specific things that we can do to be safe on the road?
What I would love to see happen is for there to be some kind of mandatory thing that does happen to your phone when you get in a car that does stop all texts and phone calls, and allows GPS, allows podcasts. I mean, they've actually done studies that found that although those are a little bit distracting, it's not the same thing because you're not engaged in that conversation. So until we get to that point, though, because we're not there yet, and it might be a long ways off until we get there, I would just say, if you're a mom and you have children in the car with you, pay attention to the fact that they're watching you.
That's so good.
Because children, I mean, I'm not a mom yet myself, so I can't speak to this, but, I think that parents tend to think, okay, if I tell my kids all the right things, tell them what to do, then that will be what changes things and what helps them. But the truth is, they're watching you all the time. Like I met a man who was a police officer recently, and he teaches a defensive driving course. And he said he had a student come in, and she'd never driven before. And the way she turned the steering wheel was with her hand underneath of it. Like just kind of very
Right.
casually moving it to the left. And he said, who taught you that? Why are you doing that? She goes, oh, that's how my mom does it.
Yeah. That's so true. I mean, we know kids definitely learn by imitation. And you're right. When they're teenagers, if they've seen their mom, talking on the phone while they're driving, texting on the phone, any of that, then even if you say, don't do that, be safe, the message that's really going to get through is what you've been doing. So I
Right.
love that. That's so important. We know that as moms, we have to be the example. So I think that's a great lesson for us. It starts with us. We need to be that example, really pay attention when we're on the road. And if we can't end it all over, we can end distracted driving in our car. So
Yeah.
being
And in other people's cars too. That's the other thing I would say is don't be afraid to speak up. I think it's kind of a social faux pas to say, oh, I'm not comfortable when you're on your phone or you're texting. And that has to change because it's no different than I'm not comfortable when you're drunk and you're driving.
There you go. And I love that we have these new insights from you. That would be a great conversation to start with a friend or a family member to say, hey, guess what I just learned? 27 seconds it's going to take you to get your full focus back on the road. So, hey, let's, not do that at a stoplight. Well,
Yeah.
we are about out of time. And so, will you tell our listeners your website so that they can go and check that out?
Sure. It's myfatherslist.com.
Okay, myfatherslist.com if you want to keep up with Laura and find out about her work on her father's list. I'm so glad that you've been with us today. I think we've really learned a lot, and I think you're really doing your dad proud. So happy birthday to him. And I think that this is a great legacy for him, for you to be living this list and for you to be spreading the awareness and helping to keep the roads safe. So thank you again for being here. And thanks to all of you for being on Moms Who Know.